Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I'm sorry that it's been so long, but don't worry. I got something very special cooking up that'll be coming out very soon. But until that drops, I kind of wanted to do something a little bit different just to hold you over. Today, we're going to be discussing economics. I'm glad you're happy. Now, with economics being such a broad topic covering everything from markets and decision making to business cycles, I kind of wanted to just dive into one specific aspect that interests me, as it's kind of related to several other economic theories and concepts. So today, we're going to be discussing the production possibility frontier, what it is, how it connects to 4 other economic concepts, and why it matters. So let's not waste any time and begin with number 1, the production possibility frontier curve. Put plainly, the production possibility frontier is a curve that can allow people to visualize the max possible output of any 2 products a country can produce at a given time, depending on its technology and resources available. Now, let me give you a personal example. I edit my own reviews for this channel, and that can take up a lot of time, especially for some of the bigger projects like the last review I did. But I also enjoy going out with my friends and doing God knows what. Now you're probably wondering, how does the PPF work in this case? Well, let me explain. Now imagine it like a menu of trade-offs. If you want more of one thing, you have to give up the other. So let's say I choose to edit for 5 hours a day. Well, in order to do that, it means I need to give up 5 hours I would have spent hanging out with my friends and allocate that to the time I spend editing. The PPF shows all the possible ways I could best split my resources, time in this case, between my 2 options. Or if you don't care for hanging out with your friends or editing, then let's use a more broad and probably accessible example. Imagine a country like Belgium. Let's say that Belgium produces only 2 things, cars and computers. Well, then the PPF could show just how Belgium can maximize its resources in producing each of the goods. In essence, the curve represents efficiency. If you're on the PPF curve, then congratulations, you're using all of your resources wisely. If you're inside of the curve, then it means that you're not maximizing your available resources. And if you're outside of the curve, well, it would be pretty impossible to obtain given your resources at this specific time, unless of course something eventually changes and shifts that. Like maybe new tech or a new resource gets added to the equation, and that would allow you to shift the PPF curve outwards. Phew! See, we covered all the basics. Wasn't so hard. But here's the thing to remember. The PPF is not an isolated concept. It directly relates to multiple other economic concepts, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to completely cover today. We're just going to be covering 4 more. So let's not waste any time and dive into number 2, opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is actually a pretty simple concept to understand, probably because we kind of already covered it in the last point. It's the thing you give up when choosing between a set of options. In layman's terms, if you decide to do one thing, you're automatically not doing something else. And I know to a lot of you watching who probably aren't in an economics major, you're probably thinking, well, that just sounds like common sense. And to an extent, it kind of is. It's actually a way of measuring trade-offs so that you can make better and more informed decisions going forward. And the good news for you guys is that opportunity cost is pretty much baked into the PPF curve. Let's go back to my editing versus hanging out example. Let's say I originally intend to edit for 5 hours and hang out for 0 hours, which would be one extreme on my PPF curve. But now let's say for the sake of argument, I decide to only edit for 3.5 hours instead of 5. This would cause a shift along the PPF curve, as I'm now giving up 1.5 hours of editing time and transferring that to my hangout time. That's my opportunity cost. Or let's flip that. Let's say I now decide to hang out for 3.5 hours instead of 0, meaning that I now have to give up 3.5 hours of editing time, and now I instead only have 1.5 hours dedicated to editing. That's my opportunity cost. Now let's go back to our Belgium example. Belgium's 2 hypothetical extremes on this PPF curve are 1,000 computers and 0 cars, or 0 computers and 250 cars. Their opportunity cost of producing those 50 extra cars is the 200 computers that Belgium had to give up. Now, as you saw in that example, The trade-off was not one-to-one, and that's going to depend on how specialized the resources of each individual country are. This is why economies need to carefully weigh their decisions, as each choice comes at the cost of another, bringing us to number 3, supply and demand. By now, I hope you guys have a good idea on how countries, or people in this case, choose to allocate their respective resources. But that begs the question, how do people or economies actually choose what point on the PPF curve they should aim for? And that is where supply and demand comes in. Now, hopefully I shouldn't have to explain this, as I know a lot of people are familiar with the concept of supply and demand, but for all the literal 5-year-olds in the audience watching, let me break it down for you. Supply and demand is the quantity of goods or services available to purchase compared to how much people actually want to buy said goods or services. The PPF shows the available opportunities of production, while supply and demand shows what's actually being produced. Now let's go back to my editing versus hanging out example. Let's say, and this is totally hypothetical, my channel gets a massive influx of new subscribers, increased watch time hours, and an increased demand for a more steady stream of content. Well then, in this case, wouldn't it make more sense for me to dedicate more of my day editing instead of hanging out with my friends? Yes, it would. As there's now a higher demand for my videos, I need to put in more effort, more supply to make those videos. So instead of staying at the 3.5 hours a day editing, maybe I might decide to go up to 5 hours of editing a day, therefore sacrificing the extra 1.5 hours of free time I have to hang. But what happens if the demand shifts the other way? Let's say the views and the feedback for my videos just absolutely tank, and let's say it goes back to being like 50 views per video, or pretty much what the norm is now. And at the same time, let's say my friends keep pestering me and demanding that I come out and hang with them. In this case, the demand for more free time increases while the demand for editing decreases. So maybe now I decide to only edit for 1.5 hours a day, and the other 3.5 hours I would dedicate to hanging out with my friends. This change in demand would therefore cause a change along the PPF curve. Just like in a real-life economy, supply and demand influence where resources are allocated to on the PPF curve. A country might be able to produce food and electronics. Now let's say the demand shifts away from food and towards electronics. If the demand shifts that way, then more resources will be allocated to making said electronics, moving production along the curve away from food. I hope y'all are hanging in there, because we've officially reached the halfway point. And good news is, the next 2 points should actually be pretty easy to explain.
Number 4, comparative advantage.
One important thing to keep in mind is that not every country is going to have the same PPF. This is because some countries are just naturally better at producing certain goods than others. Now, this can be for a multitude of reasons, including access to technology, labor skills, and the availability or exclusivity of certain resources to said country. Now, this leads us to comparative advantage, when a person or a country produces a good or service that it has the lowest opportunity cost for. Let's take Belgium and Japan, for example. Let's say they each have PPFs that focus on computers and cars. Maybe Belgium is pretty decent at producing both products, but Japan, due to its more high-tech factories, can produce cars more efficiently. If Belgium were to specialize only in producing computers, while Japan only focuses on cars, then they could each trade something while not having to split their resources between each of the two goods that they would each have to produce. This allows both countries to consume beyond their respective PPFs, meaning Belgium can get more cars than it would have produced on its own, while Japan gets more computers. Now let's take another hypothetical experiment. Let's say that tomorrow morning, Japan decides to implement this revolutionary new AI technology into their car production, which allows for a faster and more efficient car production than it previously had. If this were to happen, it would mean that Japan would be able to shift its PPF curve outward, allowing them to produce more cars without having to sacrifice their computer production. So now that we've covered all that, let's get down to our final concept. Number 5, utility. Now, in the last point, I heavily emphasized efficiency and how important that is to production. It's not about just producing something efficiently, it's also about producing something that actually benefits people. And that's where utility comes in. Now, let's say Belgium is producing 800 computers and 50 cars, meaning that it's operating efficiently on its PPF curve. But then all of a sudden, a survey drops that says that most Belgians don't actually care to own a computer and would actually be happier owning a car. In this case, Belgium would be producing in a way that maximizes its efficiency and available resources, but it's not maximizing its own utility. So then maybe the government comes in and says, hey, maybe we should shift towards car production instead of computer production. Well, then all of a sudden, a shift along the curve occurs towards cars, and maybe now their output changes to 200 computers and 200 cars to better match consumer preferences. Now, if we zoom out and focus on the larger picture, utility does have the ability to shift the entire PPF curve. Let's say Belgium decides to invest in education, making its workers more skilled and developing better and more efficient production methods. Then the PPF would be able to shift outwards due to its increase in efficiency and productivity, allowing the country to produce more of both goods, yielding a higher utility for everyone. There we have it. As promised, one major economic concept branching out and affecting multiple others. Now, at the end of the day, if you watch this video and you think economics still doesn't interest you, I still hope that this video gave you a general grasp of some of the more important economic concepts. I hope you guys found this to be a good holdover video, and if you enjoyed it, please give it a like, drop a comment down below, smash that subscriber button as it helps out with the YouTube algorithm, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out, have a good day, and goodbye.